The moment you defend yourself, you kneel, and when you kneel, they strike. But what if I told you? Silence is the sharpest dagger. In this lesson, you will learn how to let your enemies unravel themselves while you remain untouchable, untouched, and feared. Men believe words will save them, fools. In the theater of power, the tongue is a liability, not a weapon. To speak is to reveal, to defend is to confess. Silence, however, is the domain of the calculating, a fortress without a door. In this lesson, we descend into the black depths of human behavior, where perception destroys truth and restraint becomes conquest. Let the others bleed themselves dry trying to explain. You must only watch and wait. Today, I will show you why the most dangerous man says nothing. Silence. What do you feel when it enters the room? Most people flinch. They scramble to fill the void. Words, excuses, apologies, noise. But not you. Not after today. Because silence is not emptiness, it is dominance. In the court of power, those who speak first often reveal the most. They display their fears, their need to explain, their addiction to validation. They show their throat. You must be the opposite. Let me remind you of Cesare Borgia, the duke who understood the theater of perception better than any prince of his time. When his enemies accused him of cruelty, he didn't justify himself. He tightened his grip. He let silence make them doubt. Were the rumors true? Was he plotting something darker? The silence said yes, even if the truth was no. That is the brilliance. People fear what they cannot read, and silence makes you unreadable. You see, when you say nothing, others begin to project. They fill in the blanks with their own nightmares. They think you're planning something. They think you know something, even if you don't. And that fear is a form of control. Now ask yourself, why do you feel the urge to defend yourself? Because you've been taught that silence means guilt. That explanation equals innocence. But this is a lie fed to the obedient, those trained to seek approval. In truth, the powerful do not explain. They don't justify. They don't chase reputation like a dog chasing a cart. They command it. Through presence. Through stillness. Through silence. This is not just a political trick. It is deeply psychological. Humans are hardwired to reduce uncertainty. When they don't know what you're thinking, it disturbs them. It scrambles their pattern recognition. And in that disturbance, their rational mind collapses. Have you ever noticed how, in an argument, the one who grows silent always gains the upper hand? Their stillness becomes the mirror in which the other person sees themselves. They start repeating themselves, explaining harder, getting louder, while the silent one watches and wins. Even in relationships, this law holds. The person who withdraws creates desire. The one who stays silent after an emotional outburst controls the tempo. It is not cruelty. It is composure. Let me tell you a story. There was a merchant in Florence accused publicly of fraud. Everyone expected a passionate denial. Instead, he said nothing. He smiled and walked away. Whispers exploded. People questioned the accuser instead. Why wasn't he defending himself? Maybe he had nothing to defend. Maybe he was too powerful to care. And that illusion, too powerful to care, is more valuable than any argument you could ever make. The man's silence turned public opinion in his favor. He let his enemies drown in their own noise. So now I ask you, what do you do when you're attacked? When they twist your words, question your loyalty, tarnish your name? Do you rush to explain, or do you smile and remain silent? The truth is irrelevant. Perception rules the world. And perception, my friend, is easily manipulated, not by noise, but by absence. Look at modern leaders. The clever ones never answer directly. They float above conflict. They let others fight in the mud while they observe from the marble balcony of silence. They don't win debates, they end them. By not showing up. That is the move of kings, and it is available to you. But it requires discipline, restraint, a willingness to watch others crumble under their own emotional weight while you conserve your energy. Let them overextend. Let them grow louder. Let them need you to respond. And when you don't, you become myth, because silence leaves a space, and people fear the unknown far more than the known. Let your silence be that unknown. Let it haunt them. Let it linger. Let it say everything you never will. And when they collapse in confusion, guilt, or desperation, you will not have lifted a finger. That, my friend, is power in its purest form. But here is the danger. What happens when your silence forces the enemy into recklessness? What if, in their desperation, they expose everything? What do you do then? We'll answer that in the next lesson. Stay watching, stay silent, and let them speak their own undoing. Let them talk. That's the first rule of psychological warfare. Let them believe the stage is theirs. Let them perform. Because every word they speak is a crack in their armor. And the louder they grow, the more obvious their fear becomes. You must remain the shadow. Have you ever watched someone grow uncomfortable with your silence? They ask a question. You give them nothing. And suddenly, they start explaining, over-explaining. They search your face, desperate for validation or resistance. But you give them neither. And so they reveal more than they ever intended. This is not a theory. It is a law of human behavior rooted in insecurity. The need to be right, to be understood, to win the crowd. It drives people to ruin. You need only create the space for them to unravel. Take the Roman Senate. When Julius Caesar was assassinated, the conspirators rushed to the public square. They expected praise, a hero's welcome. They had, after all, saved the Republic. But the people were silent. The conspirators began shouting, explaining, defending their actions, and with every word, they looked more unstable, more desperate, more guilty. The silence of the crowd was their downfall, and the chaos that followed allowed Antony to step in. Not with defense, but with calculated exposure. He didn't accuse them. He let their words speak against them. He merely held up Caesar's bloodied cloak and said very little. The mob did the rest. So, understand this. When you remain silent, you create a vacuum. That vacuum pressures others to speak, and when they speak under pressure, they reveal themselves. Most people cannot bear ambiguity. They must fill it, and that is where they fall. Let me give you a quieter example, closer to your world. Imagine an office. A colleague subtly accuses you in front of others. That report was late. I heard you didn't send the figures on time. Now pause. Let silence enter the room. Don't defend. Don't react. Just look at them. Watch what happens. They'll start justifying. Well, maybe someone else caused the delay. I'm just saying what I heard. Then they'll pivot. I'm not blaming you, of course. Just wanted to be clear. And now they're exposed. They weren't making a statement. They were fishing for dominance. And your silence forced them to reveal their intent. Had you responded emotionally, you would have entered their frame. You would have appeared guilty, or worse, insecure. But by doing nothing, you made them panic, and panic makes people tell the truth, especially the truth they wish to hide. You see, silence isn't passive. It is aggressive patience, a trap disguised as stillness. Your enemy enters the arena thinking you're unarmed. They start swinging wildly, believing you've surrendered. But the more they swing, the more they exhaust themselves. And in time, they reveal the openings. Now considering, why are people so quick to explain themselves? Because they fear how they'll look. They fear judgment more than guilt. They want to control perception. But the attempt to control it often exposes their real weakness. Your job is not to win these encounters. Your job is to witness them. To sit back and let time, pride, and panic do your work for you. The more they talk, the more control you gain. There's an ancient phrase, give a man enough rope, you know the rest. But here's the key. They must grab the rope themselves. You do not hand it to them. You simply remain still while they reach for it. And reach they will. Especially when you give them nothing. They will invent your motives, invent your defense, invent their own downfall. Silence, then, becomes a mirror, but a warped one. One in which they see not who you are, but who they fear you might be. That fear drives confession, and confession, even indirect, is fatal in the hands of the observant. So I ask you again, do you need to answer every attack? Or would you rather let your enemy show their hand? before you ever play yours. Remember this, the strongest accusations are undone none with rebuttal but with stillness, with time, with silence. But what happens when their unraveling begins to backfire on you? What if the lies grow legs? What if perception starts to favor them? That requires a different strategy. And in the next segment, I will show you why defending yourself at that moment is the worst mistake of all. The moment you defend yourself, you admit defeat. Not in fact, but in frame. Because to defend is to kneel before the rules your enemy has written, and that is the first rule of strategic failure. Let me ask you, who chose the battleground of this conflict? Who dictated the terms, the premise, the assumption that you must now disprove? If it wasn't you, you've already lost. Understand thising. The one who defines the narrative controls the outcome. And most people, in their desperate rush to be seen as good or right, accept the enemy's frame without a second thought. They step into a courtroom where the verdict was written before the trial began, and they call that defending themselves. Fools. Let me take you back to Florence. There was a young nobleman, arrogant, proud, accused by a rival of conspiring against the Medici. The charge was false. But what did he do? He protested. Loudly, publicly, he claimed innocence. He begged allies to vouch for him. He wrote letters, gave speeches. He entered their frame, trying to disprove their lie. And what did the public see? Not a man defending truth, but a man trying too hard to appear innocent. They said, if he's truly guiltless, why is he so loud? Do you see? Truth didn't matter. Control of the narrative did. And he surrendered it the moment he spoke in someone else's language. You must never do this. Because when you argue within someone else's frame, you grant it legitimacy. You validate the assumption that you are on trial, that you must explain yourself, that you are beneath them, that your word has less weight than their suspicion. This dynamic is poisonous, and the poison spreads every time you open your mouth to plead. But there is another way. A colder, sharper, more surgical path. Reject the frame altogether. When they accuse, do not defend, demand, do not answer. When they corner you, smile and say nothing. This disorients them. It removes the fuel their fire needs to burn. It forces them to overextend, to make the accusation louder, bolder, more absurd. And in that overreach, they collapse. Psychologically, this is called frame control. He holds the dominant frame, imposes reality. The rest adapt. Just like in war, the high ground commands the battlefield. You must always hold the high ground, not by fighting harder, but by refusing to fight on their terms. Let me bring this to your world. A co-worker spreads a rumor that you manipulated a deal for personal gain. False, of course. But now all eyes turn to you. You feel the heat, the pressure, the need to explain. Don't. If you say, that's not true, you've already lost. You've just made their story real enough to require a rebuttal. Instead, say nothing or worse. For them, smile and carry on with your work, as if the rumor is beneath your concern. People will notice. They'll ask, why doesn't he defend himself? And then the magic happens. The suspicion flips. They begin to question the accuser, their motive, their weakness. You win. Without lifting a finger, because power is not in being believed. Power is in making belief irrelevant. You're not just avoiding their frame. You're imposing your own. A frame of indifference, a frame of strength. A frame that says, I do not respond to children throwing stones from below. Even in relationships, this holds. Think of the lover who accuses you of not caring enough. They demand proof, a long conversation, in emotional justification, and most people, out of guilt or fear, fall into the trap. But not you. Not anymore, because now you know the minute you explain, you legitimize their test. You place your value on trial. And in doing so, you lose value. Instead, you give them silence, calm, unshakable presence. You say, through your stillness, I do not chase validation. I am the standard. And in time, they recalibrate, or they leave. Either way, you win. So ask yourself, whose frame are you living in right now? Whose assumptions have you accepted without resistance? And more importantly, What happens when you become the one who sets the narrative, the one who no longer responds, but forces others to respond to you? That is the next step, and it requires far more than silence. It demands strategy. Join me in the next segment, where we will explore how to construct the narrative and bend the minds of others to your frame. Before they ever realize it, control is never taken by force alone. It is taken through perception. And perception, my friend, is ruled by the one who speaks least, not loudest. Ask yourself this. Have you ever noticed how the most powerful people rarely explain themselves? They say little. They leave gaps. And in those gaps, imagination takes over. Because when you say less, people don't know what to think. So they start thinking more. And here's the secreting: they rarely imagine you as weaker than you are. They imagine you as worse, as stronger, as colder, as more dangerous. You didn't say it, but they believe it. And that belief gives you power. Now let me tell you a story. The Doge of Venice once stood before the court, accused of manipulating the trade routes to enrich his own estate. He listened. He let the accuser finish every word. And when it was his turn to respond, he said just this: "Speak with the fire of ambition. I will not quench it." Then he turned and walked out. No defense, no denial, no clarification. What followed was chaos. The accuser, thrown off balance, began spiraling, trying to justify himself, trying to paint the silence as guilt. But the more he spoke, the more the court began to look at him with suspicion. Why so emotional? Why so desperate? The Doge's silence, short and dignified, had done the work of 1,000 rebuttals. He understood the principling: say less, and let the silence grow teeth. You see, people hate a vacuum. They are uncomfortable not knowing what you think, what you feel, what you intend. So they fill it with fear, suspicion, reverence. And when people begin to fear might be true about you, they treat you as if it is true. That is influence. Let's bring this closer to your world. Modern communication has turned everyone into oversharers. Social media, text messages, constant justification. People bleed out their minds in public, but not the strategic mind, not the person who understands control. You stay measured. You drop only fragments. You let others chase your meaning, while you remain unreadable. When they say, "Why didn't you reply to my message?" you don't apologize, you nod. You smile. You move on. When someone asks, "What do you think of what they said about you?" you reply. Some things don't need an answer. And then you fall silent. What you've done is more than dodge the trap. You've flipped it. Because now they wonder what you know, what you're planning, what you're capable of. This is the power of suggestion, and suggestion always outranks explanation. Psychologically, the mind prefers unfinished stories. It loops on them. It obsesses over them. Give someone 90% of a picture and they'll work overtime to complete it. But here's the tricking: they won't finish it with logic, they'll finish it with emotion. And emotion is easily twisted. So, say less. Let their imagination say the rest. Remember, a man who speaks little appears in control. A man who says too much appears unfiltered, erratic, weak. And a leader, a tactician, a strategist. You must never be weak in the eyes of others. Even the church knew this. The Pope never revealed his full thinking. He issued brief proclamations and let theologians interpret for decades. The mystery was the message. You too must become a living contradiction. Calm, yet unreadable. Visible, yet untouchable. Present but never fully known. Because the more people know you, the less they fear you. Let mystery be your shadow. Let suggestion be your sword. Let restraint become your greatest display of strength. So when others ask, "Why didn't he respond?" they'll also wonder, "Did I go too far? Did I just make an enemy? Is he watching me now, waiting?" And that question, that whisper in their mind, is the leash you hold. So now I ask Yug, why reveal your hand when their fear of what might be in it already controls them? In the end, it's not the truth that matters. It's the unknown, the silence that echoes louder than any defense ever could. But what if you must speak? What if silence is no longer enough? Then you must speak with precision, with intention, with strategy. And in the next segment, you will learn how to speak like a weapon, not often but surgically, brutally, decisively. Because when you do speak, it must end the conversation. Control is never taken by force alone. The most powerful rulers bend men's minds without ever raising a sword. They do not shout. They do not beg. They do not explain. They observe. They stay silent. And they let others destroy themselves. Your greatest weapon is not what you say, it is what you withhold. Make others speak first. Make them fill the silence. Make them reveal their fears while you reveal nothing. Because when you speak rarely, they listen. When you reveal little, they imagine much. And when they fear what you might be thinking, you own them. Ask yourself, do you want to be understood? Or do you want to be obeyed? Now, act like it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let me know how you use silence to bend the will of others. Subscribe for more strategies forged in the shadows of human nature. And share this video with those who are too loud, too visible, too easy to control. Stay quiet, stay dangerous, and never defend yourself.